executed synchronously and asynchronously. Synchronously means it is like if there are 3 lines of code, each line will, the second line will wait for the first line of code to execute, then the second line will execute, then the third line will execute. That is, each line of code will wait for the previous line of code to complete and then it will execute serially. Whereas when we talk about asynchronous, it is like a thread. Like if you have 3 lines of code and line number 2 is, you mark it as asynchronous, then it will run in a separate thread. So you can mark methods to run in a separate process if you want. You don't have full-fledged threading in Apex, but you can, if you mark a method as @future, it will run in a separate process, okay, asynchronously. Now where else you can use Apex is, suppose you want to perform very extreme complex validations, SOQLs across multiple objects, you can use this. And suppose you want to build complex business process with a lot of business logic, sometimes may not be always supported by flows, you can use Apex. Now little more in detail. So Apex can be used in triggers. So when does a trigger run? Whenever a record changes, whether a before insert or an after insert, you can write database triggers. You can write email services. Salesforce gives you an email service class where you can write advanced email parsing, send receive emails, add attachments, and you can also do a custom parsing logic on that. Okay. Now where else you can also, as I told you, that Apex web services can be exposed via something called as a web service definition language file. Now suppose you make a method as a web service instead of a public or private, it will become available to third party via web service definition language file. Now in adding to that, you can also consume other web services. Suppose there are some other web services endpoints like Oracle applications or Java Spring Boot which is exposed. You can use Apex to consume those other web services also. You can write controllers for your Visual Force and LWC. Apex class, the controllers will be written in Apex class and it will drive the logic. Suppose when a person clicks a button and you don't want the default behavior of Salesforce, but you want some custom logic to run, do some queries and update the screen, you can use Visual Force, you can use Apex. Okay, so these are the broad places where you can use Apex. Now, sometimes some interviewers may ask you, like, do you know any other programming language? What are the differences? Okay, or similarity. Now let's compare with Java, because Apex basically is like Java, same syntax, much more easier. So what are the similarities? Is strongly typed and case insensitive. You can create classes, interface, properties and collections just like in Java. All the conditional control flow statements are similar and you can use similar IDE that you used to develop in Java, correct? Visual Studio Code, Eclipse, all these things you can use. But what is the key difference? Very, very important. Many times interviewers may ask you. Apex code is compiled and executed on the cloud. You don't need a virtual machine like Java, like JVM. And you cannot control the memory and the heap. You cannot do explicit garbage collection operations. Now the third point is very, very important. In Java, for example, to connect to the database, you need a JDBC connection or a Hibernate connection. Here, Apex does not need anything like that. It is aware of the underlying Salesforce schema, data model and objects. You don't need to create any connection and reset any connections. And in addition to that, it also supports DML and transactions and rollbacks. Apex does not support multiple inheritance, one major difference compared to Java, in case you get a question. One of the biggest advantage, again, it has an inbuilt testing for framework, sorry. So you don't need to have a separate JUnit and all that. You can just annotate a class as @istTest and it will become a test class. Now what are the different code editors that you have? You have force.com app, which is you can directly write it on the app, then you can write it in the developer console, create a class from there, open up a new class. You can use Visual Studio Code, Eclipse and Aside.io. Nowadays Visual Studio Code is the main thing promoted by Salesforce. And suppose you want to write anonymous blocks, like you want to write execute some code snippets, test some queries or run some batch jobs, you can use the anonymous block. So these are the places that you can use. So they will ask you, like, what are the IDEs that you are going to use. Now what is the developer console? Okay, now